Before we start, for those of you that are here about the pit dog ordinance, which I think a lot of you are probably here for, I know Mr. Rath and Mr. Roletta are working on some legislation. It will be hopefully brought up at the next safety committee meeting. I think that's what they're working on. Mr. Rath
will be introducing legislation, and I'll call a committee meeting.
We'll have a committee meeting next Monday, and that will be discussed. That's at 5:30 here in these chambers. After that, if it gets voted out of committee, it goes to the next week. It'll go to council, which I don't know what the calendar is. February 2nd for the first reading, and then 2 weeks after that, it'll be voted on. I don't know what happened to my calendar up here, but 2 weeks after that, it'll be voted on. So for those of you here with pit bulls, that's how that's going to go. Nothing on the agenda tonight. I know some of you may want to speak during citizens' comments. You're welcome to, but I just ask you to make a brief comment. This is not a question and answer period with council. It's just you come up and make a comment, and don't all of you come up and say the same thing. If you want 2 or 3 of you to be the spokesman, that would be great. So anyway, we're going to start tonight. I'd like to call this meeting of your Newark City Council to order. Autumn, please call the roll.
Mr. Cost?
Here.
Mrs. Floyd?
Here.
Mr. Guthrie?
Here.
Ms. Hall?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. Marmee?
Here.
Mr. Rath?
Here.
Mr. Roletta?
Here.
Mr. Blake?
Here.
Mr. Buck?
We have 9 present this evening. Next, we have the invocation by Mrs. Floyd. If you please rise, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Would you bow your heads, please? Almighty God, we thank you for the opportunity to meet here together in a free country, allowed to speak our ideas freely with one another. We ask that in this time of year when there are so many people ill and some with very serious illness, those that you be with them and with their families. There's a lot of flu around. Please be with those people as well. We ask that you are with us tonight as we make decisions for the city of Newark. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Floyd. Next on the agenda this evening, we have caucus. That's a time for council to discuss anything that's pertinent to the agenda tonight. Do we have anything? Mr. Marmee?
Make a motion to excuse Mr. Bub.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Marmee, second by Mrs. Floyd. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you, Mr. Marmee. Anything else for caucus? Next, we have our council minutes of January 5th, 2014. Is there a motion to approve those?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Rath, second by Mr. Johnson. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Thank you. That passes. We have 4 reports this evening from standing committees, one from Finance, Service, Personnel, and Safety. Without objection, those will be received and filed. Under reports of city officials, we also have 3 this evening, 2 from our auditor and 1 from Barb Jobs, our city tax administrator. Under communications tonight, we have 3 communications, 1 from the Ohio Department of Disabilities, 1 from Daniel Crawford, and 1 from the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. Those will also be received and filed without objection. Next on the agenda this evening, we have comments from citizens. There are 2 times this evening that you can comment. Again, this is not a debate with council, not a question and answer period. This is just an opportunity for you to come up, give us your name and address for the record, and make a brief comment if you would. 1 is now, 1 is after the legislation. If you just kind of raise your hand if you have a comment so I can direct you up here, we'll get started. Mrs. Loomis?
Rhonda Loomis, 870 West Church Street. The discussion on social media and the Advocate site have been all over the place in regards to the BSL and the city of Newark. Emotion comes into play with sweet pictures of pits and the not-so-sweet pictures of the aftermath of a dog attack. The Advocate ran a story with a picture of an alleged, fresh, just-happened dog bite. However, the most frightening thing out of that article was that the pit was given to the irresponsible owner to quarantine. Seems like something was off or very, very wrong. So remove the emotion. I like to research and I like facts. First, I have an answer to my own question, as I have not heard from the safety chairman, and I would like to thank Mr. Rath for taking the time to research and discuss this with me. I questioned whether or not the ACO was circumventing the legislation by changing vicious to exotic. The pit bull legislation is covered in 2 separate ordinances, which leads to the confusion. They're covered under 618.15, which talks about dogs being deemed dangerous or vicious, covering all breeds that have bitten. And then 618.22, which is titled Exotic and Restricted Animals. That's where the permits come into play and all their restrictions. So when I heard the word exotic, I found it just happens to be where that section of the law dealing with permits is within the codified ordinance. I have here information from the health department I'm going to pass out that shows dog bites, and those bites, which of those are pits, which you're going to see is very, 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 very little. I have a copy of a special order by the City of Reynoldsburg in regards to their officers seeing a pit in Licking County. This booklet that I have here is from Janice Bradley, who helped introduce House Bill 14, which is what the state of Ohio passed to eliminate the BSL for the state. This is for Mr. Rath only, who graciously offered to sponsor new legislation. So does the BSL change the outcome of bite and attacks? People that are going to break the law, break it. People that take no responsibility for their pets will never do so, yet keep getting them. The identification process appears to be flawed or subjective. I just don't believe the law stops a bad dog from biting any more than a restraining order stops a person intent on killing their spouse. It may be time to stop wasting city time and resources on a law that is outdated, that is clogging up and losing in our local court system. Judge Higgins' response in the Reynoldsburg case is on YouTube. He ruled in favor of the defendant. Council stated 3 years ago they wanted to see what the repercussions were from the state pulling BSL from state law. That's 3 years ago. Time to repeal a law that is no longer relevant. Like everything else, there was a time for it. Now it is too much discretionary power for a one-man office. I think Toby's job would be horrible, full of what we humans are capable of with our animals. We have an overpopulation of dogs and cats, starving animals, and at the moment, one idiot human who is allegedly trapping and drowning cats in the Licking River for fun, bragging at his workplace that he has done so. An attorney at the meeting Monday night pointed out potential flaws in the law. You can debate it, you can disagree, you can try to tighten it, rewrite it. But ladies and gentlemen, don't fix it, repeal it.
Thank you, Mrs. Silver.
And that's just for Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
Anyone else would like to speak to this first section of citizens' comments?
My name is Janae Stolfire, and I live at 780 Cedar Run Road. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in front of all of you tonight. I have been a business owner in Newark for over 10 years. In lieu of recent events involving dogs, I feel the need to say that more needs to be done, not only to protect the citizens of Newark, but also the dogs that are owned by careless and irresponsible people. Not only are people victims in these instances, but the dogs also suffer as victims at the hands of their owners. As a responsible dog owner, I too want to be protected from the reckless few who disregard the laws that govern responsible pet ownership. I know that some try to make this a breed issue, but this has nothing to do with breed. It's a dog issue and an issue surrounding the careless people who sometimes own a dog. I am recommending that we eliminate the breed-specific from Newark Code of Ordinance 618.5, dangerous and vicious dogs, specifically 5C and anything that pertains to breed-specific. I am asking we remove the term pit bull from the definition of a vicious dog in the current law. I do realize that there will be some people concerned on behalf of what they feel is a risk factor involved with this change, but helping educate all dog owners on proper responsibilities as pet owners and providing resources to keep our community and animals safe will help reassure this. Momentum is clearly changing as communities are realizing that aggressive dogs are not a breed-specific trait, but a trait that many factors are included, such as socialization and how a dog is cared for. In turn, Animal control officers can be far more effective in protecting Newark by focusing on a dog's behavior, not the breed. Another reason to end BSL in our community is the waste of resources from the city of Newark and its taxpayers, with resources being used on owners and dogs that are no threat to public safety. These resources are being diverted from true safety threats, meaning breed-specific laws make people less safe, not more safe. Breed discriminatory laws cost the citizens of the city of Newark an estimated $79,790 yearly, while accomplishing very little. I did bring each of you a breakdown of all the areas how our money is spent in Newark. As an active member and business owner within our community, I would like to offer any assistance and resources I have to make Newark, Ohio a safe community for dogs and the citizens who call this town home. Thank you.
So just stand in this hall, that would be great. Anyone else for this first section of citizens' comments? Okay. We'll move on to ordinances on the first reading, 15-01.
Ordinance 15-1 by Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, an ordinance extending the authority of the temporary board of zoning district revision.
15-01 will be held for a second reading. Next we have 15-02.
Ordinance 15-02 by Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, an ordinance amending the position classification, pay range, and department authorization tables of the City of Newark Division of Water and Wastewater by creating the classification of financial secretary and setting the compensation therefore and abolishing one secretary position.
15-02 will be held for a second reading. Next on the first reading we have 15-03.
Ordinance 15-03 by Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, an ordinance assuming maintenance responsibility for the full width of Licking Springs Road from the existing City of Newark corporate boundaries as shown on the map attached as Exhibit A, except for a 24-inch culvert located adjacent to 8022 Licking Springs Road upon annexation of 47.211 acres more or less located in Newton Township to the City of Newark, agreeing to cooperate in the maintenance of said roadways and identifying the Township of Newton and Licking County and declaring an emergency.
15-03 has been on the first reading, but it is an emergency. What is your wish?
Mr. President,
Mr. Cost.
I'd like to make a motion to approve 1503.
Motion by Mr. Cost to adopt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rath. Any discussion on 15-03?
Mr. President.
Mr. Cost.
My understanding is there is a commissioner's hearing, I believe it is next week, that puts a deadline on this, and that's why we're asking for the emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Cost. Anyone else? Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Guthrie?
No.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
And Mr. Buck?
15-03 passes 8-1. Next we have resolutions on the first reading, 15-01.
Resolution 15-01 by Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
Mr. Blake?
Mr. President, move to waive the two-day reading rule.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Blake to waive the two-day reading rule, second by Mrs. Floyd. Mr. Blake?
Dealing with some employee compensation.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the two-day reading rule.
Mr. Cost,
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd,
Yes.
Mr. Guthrie,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Roletta,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
Mr. Buck.
The two-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Blake?
Mr. President, move to adopt 1501.
Motion by Mr. Blake.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Floyd. Is there any discussion on 15-01? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll to vote.
Mr. Cost,
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd,
Yes.
Mr. Guthrie,
Yes.
Ms. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Marmee,
Yes.
Mr. Rath,
Yes.
Mr. Roletta,
Yes.
Mr. Blake,
Yes.
and Mr. Buck.
15-01 passes. Next, we have 15-02.
Resolution 15-02 by Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee, and Mr. Rath. This is a resolution, it's an ODOT piece of legislation for construction of a pedestrian bridge over the Log Pond Run and various sidewalk improvements at various locations.
15-02 will be held for second reading. Next, we have 15-03.
Resolution 15-03 by Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution authorizing and directing the mayor of the city of Newark to apply for financial support from the state of Ohio 2015 recreational trails program.
15-03, Mr. Blake.
Mr. President, move to waive the 2-day reading rule.
Motion by Mr. Blake to waive the 2-day reading rule, second by Mrs. Floyd. Mr. Blake.
I understand there's a timeline that we want to reach with this application.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Autumn, please call the roll to waive the 2-day reading rule on 15-03.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
And Mr. Bub?
2-day reading rule has been waived. Mr. Blake.
Mr. President, move to adopt 1503.
Motion by Mr. Blake to adopt, second by Mrs. Floyd. Is there any discussion on 15-03? Seeing none, Autumn, please call the roll vote.
Mr. Cost?
Yes.
Mrs. Floyd?
Yes.
Mr. Guthrie?
Yes.
Ms. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Marmee?
Yes.
Mr. Rath?
Yes.
Mr. Roletta?
Yes.
Mr. Blake?
Yes.
And Mr. Bub?
15-03 passes 9-0. Next, we have on the first reading 15-04.
Resolution 15-04 by Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee, and Mr. Rath. Resolution 1504 is ODOT legislation for construction of a new interchange over State Route 16 to replace current at-grade intersection with Cherry Valley Road.
15-04 will be held for a second reading. Next, we have 15-05.
Resolution 15-05 by Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath. Resolution 1505 is also ODOT legislation to construct a new interchange of State Route 16 and Cherry Valley Connector.
15-05 will be held for a second reading. And finally, this evening, we have 15-06.
Resolution 15-06 by Mrs. Floyd, Mr. Cost, Mr. Marmee, Mr. Rath, a resolution appropriating monies for current expenses of the municipal corporation.
And finally, 15-06 will be held for second reading, which will be in 2 weeks. And that concludes our legislation tonight. Thank you very much. Next on the agenda, we have our second opportunity for comments from citizens. Do we have anyone who would like to comment? Again, the same rules apply.
Amanda Sayers, 422 Wellington Avenue, Newark, Ohio.
Can I ask you to speak up just a little bit, ma'am?
I'll try. I'm just here to kind of tell a personal story. I have a son who has cerebral palsy, and I agree with Janelle that, you know, the laws have to change somewhere, and like what kind of people are actually being able to own certain, you know, breeds of animals. You know, I've been around Chihuahuas that have, you know, wanted to bite quicker than any animal I've seen. But be more discriminative against the owners and not the breed, you know. She just turned a year old, and we're going to send her to school, and she's amazing with my son. And I would hate for anything to, you know, hinder that or take her away from our family or my son. So I took off work to come here, so I just wanted to share my story with you guys.
Thank you, ma'am. We appreciate it. Anyone else?
My name is Sarah Burke. I am not a resident of Newark.
Just give us your address.
11330 Miller Road, Johnstown.
Thank you.
I am a resident of Licking County. I'm a proud guardian to 3 pit bulls. I am the president of vice president, of I Have a Dream Rescue. We are primarily a pit bull based organization, and our dream is that one day no dog will be persecuted for the shape of its head, but based on and judged on the content of their character. So I'm just here to speak on behalf of people of the city of Newark. These dogs are wonderful, and it's just the laws are unfair to the dogs and to responsible owners. As I said, pit bulls are wonderful, and they deserve a chance to live a wonderful life without having to prove themselves, just like any other dog. And as you said earlier, the problem is irresponsible owners. It's not a specific type of dog, and I truly believe that. And just to share a little story, my first pit bull actually saved my husband and I from a fire. She woke us up in the night, and I truly believe that she's my hero. So just to give you that little tidbit. So thank you.
Thank you. Once again, as Mr. Rath said, I do believe if the legislation gets finished, that it will be in Mr. Roletta's Safety Committee meeting next week, and we'll go from there. So, is there anyone else who would like to wrap up citizens' comments this evening? Ma'am. Daniel, you're next.
Allie Long, 217 South Clinton Road. I'm here just to back up everybody else. Like everybody else has said, I'm being charged right now with having a exotic animal and harboring one in my house. They're not exotic, for one. They are a special kind of dog. But to go back on the reputation that they do have and everything, they were bred to be fighting dogs and all that. But not only that, they were also used as nanny dogs back in like 1900s, I do believe. And it just kills me how everybody's judging this one breed. I have one, Patches, best dog in the world. I also have a Chow. She's bitten me twice now. I've only had her for 3-4 months. She was a rescue. My pit bull, I've had him for a year. Never had a problem with him. Even for you guys. It tells you, I looked up the definition and all that for everybody and everything. Like I said, I got to go face a judge the 29th and everything. But there's signatures in there from most of people in Newark that not only do we want to take these dogs off the vicious list, but we also want to make them to be where they can be rescued and adopted out, not euthanized after 3 days of being in the pound. That's it.
Thank you. Do you want to keep this on file with the court, or do you want this back at the end of the meeting?
No, you guys can keep it.
Okay, thank you. Daniel?
Daniel Crawford, 163 South 2nd Street. Honestly, democracy is a beautiful thing. I rise in solidarity with all the dog owners here. I'm not a dog owner myself, but what I see is truly inspirational in that, the people here have seen an injustice in the law and have organized to bring an end to it. And for me, it's a testimony to, how strong the people's power is when they are united and their resolve is strong. And I want to extend a thanks to Councilman Roletta as Safety Committee Chairman for giving them an opportunity to speak last week, and then Councilman Rath for taking up their cause. And hopefully, in the weeks ahead, this gets dealt with, and I encourage all the citizens who have showed up here tonight and in the previous weeks to continue remaining persistent in this cause. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to wrap this up? Like to say something different that they haven't said? Hang on. Okay, I'll let you have your 1 minute rebuttal.
I don't have to go up there.
Yeah, you do.
Allie Long, 217 South Clinton. I actually got with a bunch of people in the city of Newark, and I made a small video clip for you guys of these so-called exotic animals that you guys call them and all that. And I was wondering if I brought it in, if you guys could take a look at it later or something.
If you wanted to bring to the safety committee next Monday, that would be fine. Maybe Mr. Roletta can look at it or figure out how to handle it.
All right, thank you.
Or, can you email it?
Huh?
Is it emailable?
Yeah, I can email
You
it.
can email it to our clerk. She'll tell you what her address is afterwards, and then she'll get it to everybody.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone from the administration? Our auditor, Mr. Johnson?
Pass.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Our Honorable Law Director Sassen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll pass.
Thank you, Director Sassen. Mayor Hall.
I'll also pass.
This is miscellaneous comments in case you're not wondering what we're doing here. First on the agenda, we have Mr. Koss.
I would like to call Service Committee meeting, and with that I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Koss. Mrs. Floyd?
The only thing I want to mention is I want people to be aware of how many new events are coming up at the Midland. Michael Bolton's going to be there. Ricky Skaggs is going to be there. There are a number of really good shows coming up, so I encourage you to check, the website or check the newspaper and attend some of those events. We have a gym in the Midland in downtown Newark, and so I would encourage people to go to some of these events. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Floyd. Mr. Guthrie?
I don't think I have anything this evening, Mr. President. I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. Mrs. Hall?
I'll pass, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hall. Mr. Johnson?
I'll pass.
Mr. Marmon?
Is there a ball game on tonight? I don't know.
Mr. Rass, I'm sure you're not going to pass.
No, I'm not going to pass, but I am going to make it brief, and I do have a variety of topics that I want to cover. And I'll try not to get emotional here, but the city of Newark lost a great citizen this week. Roger Hall, who was a Navy veteran, member of the Knights, member of the Elks, and also a city auctioneer. Did a lot of the auctions for the city of Newark. I just want to bring him up. Very excited about all the legislation that's going through about the Cherry Valley interchange on the west side of Newark. That's absolutely phenomenal that we're pushing that through. And I can't wait to see that under construction and finally completed. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that now that we have the Cherry Valley interchange moving forward, that we need to not drop the ball and continue to press and see if we can get funding and construction done on Reddington Road and that expansion as well. In regards to the pit bull issues, I just think, if nothing else, this is a great example of city government at work. I'm glad to see everybody here. I'm very glad to see the kids here in the audience, because this gives them an opportunity to see that if you want something changed where you live, you can do that. Hopefully you can do that. Time will tell. But this is at least the process that you go through. Whether you're successful or not, this is the process of city government. This is the citizens standing up. And I commend you all for that. And I think that's all I have. So I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Rath. Mr. Roletta.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll call a safety committee meeting. With that, I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Roletta. And Mr. Blake.
Call a finance committee meeting. I'll pass.
Thank you, Mr. Blake. Once again, I'd like to add my thanks for everyone for coming tonight and being part of your Newark City government. This is, as Mr. Rath said, this is how the government works. Next Monday, the 26th, will be committee meetings starting at 5:30. And again, there'll be finance, service, and safety. And I'm sure you'll probably want to come to be part of the safety committee meeting or at least listen to that discussion. Our next council meeting is Monday, February 2nd at 7 o'clock here in this room. Also, the committees are here in this room. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Mr. Kloss, second by Mr. Rath. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We'll adjourn. Once again, thank you for coming.